Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today. We're just going to give a few minutes for the room to fill up. But in the meantime, I would love to hear from you. So there is a poll link in the chat. If we can re-up the link in the chat again, it tends to disappear sometimes. We would love to hear about a unique community that you are a part of. So please go ahead and just take a few seconds to fill that out. Thank you all for joining today. I know we're all just giving a few moments to enter the Zoom room, but in the meantime, you can see a poll link in the chat. If you can go ahead and copy and paste that to your browser, we would love to hear from you. We would love to hear about a unique community that you are a part of. As folks are entering the room, I just encourage you to copy and paste that poll link into your browser and share with us a unique community that you are a part of. Let me go ahead and see if a few answers are coming through. Okay, lovely. I'm going to start off from the bottom here. I know folks are still joining. If we can enter the poll link in the chat again, just for new folks. We want to hear about a unique community that you're a part of. So I see here Contact Improv Dance Class, Asian American Writers Workshop, another dance community, dog parks. I'm sure there are a lot of dog and puppy friendly people here. Black motorcycle community in Denver, queer community, exclamation point, map makers. Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Fabulous women RVing. I think I might need another hyperlink to learn more about that. If you could share it in the chat as well. Scuba diving, amazing. Mecklenburg County, thank you so much for joining. Triathlon, mountain biking. Okay, I see the active folks in this room. Indian adoptee community, love that. Romanian, so sometimes attend Romanian festivals in DC. Okay, I would also love a link to that. That's amazing. Gardener and Buffalo, New York. Okay, great. So I encourage you to continue to fill out this poll. We're going to keep reading through that in the next few minutes. But in the meantime, I will go ahead and take us to our agenda. I hope folks can see my screen okay. So I just want to welcome you all here for our kickoff for the Community Engagement for Lasting Impact track. For those who do not know me, I am Christina Jang. I am the Senior Program Manager for 10-Minute Walk. And it is really exciting to be here to launch the second iteration of the Communities of Practice and to bring people together today to specifically focus on community engagement. So for today's agenda, we will have a few presentations at the top of the hour. You will hear from other members from 10-Minute Walk, as well as TPL Community Strategies team. That will also include a case study and storytelling around Wenatchee, Washington, as well as findings that we have heard from the 100 largest cities in the US from the City Park Facts Survey. And then after that, we reserve half of the time for breakout groups. And during that time, we ask for a camera on. We will be asking for folks to unmute and engage us in the discussion. And in each of our rooms, there will be a TPL facilitator to walk you through the questions. So here for our welcome, I just want to introduce a few folks that will be presenting today. We have here from Community Strategies team, Carrie Simmons and Geneva Vest, and then from 10-Minute Walk, Bianca Shoelaker. And then here are all the TPL folks who will be in your rooms today for facilitation, and they will walk you through the few breakout group discussions that Geneva had sent prior to the session. And we went through this poll already. Let me see if we have any new answers. All of them are interesting and unique. Okay, I'm glad I went back to this. Tuba player community, that is amazing. Part of naturalist, arts and science community, yoga, absolutely. Juggling and unicycling, daycare parents, absolutely. Tree week, watercolorists. Okay, there is a lot to riff on here, so I really hope you bring more of these answers as you meet with your TPL facilitators. Now bringing us back to our presentation. Here we go. I will go ahead and hand it off to our senior director and lead for 10-minute walk, Bianca. Bianca, you can go ahead and come on to screen.
Awesome. Thanks, Christina, and thanks everyone for joining today. We are particularly excited for this community of practice track. Just a little bit of level setting. I'm going to keep this fairly short because we want to dig into the material from community strategies in the breakout sessions today. But as you may know, the Trust for Public Land is a national nonprofit. So we work around the country with communities and cities in a number of places, including probably a lot of the geographies where you all represent. And we work on parks, trails, schoolyards, and lands. So a lot of different forms of green and open space community spaces and community anchors. And we do this because of the benefits, because of the outcomes that it has. And we have 4 commitment areas: health, equity, climate, and community. And these are really the reasons that we do this work. They're the reasons that a lot of you are doing this work. And they center and guide a lot of the types of work that we do. And one of the particular areas that a lot of our team, the 10-minute walk program, focus on relates to parks. And of course, we're looking at all these different types of green spaces. But a few years ago, when we mapped all park spaces in the United States, we saw that there was a very significant park equity gap. So we know that there are benefits to having parks. Those commitment areas that I just went through are a lot of the reasons and a lot of the benefits that parks provide. But we know that 100 million people, that's 1 in 3 US residents, doesn't have a local park space that's close to home, that's easily accessible. And that means that there is a huge gap in the benefits that people are able to participate in and really that are missing for a lot of our community members. So that's the reason that the 10-minute walk program was launched 5 years ago, to help fill this park equity gap. And it's a driving mission, driving goal for the organization at large. So as I said, 100 million people, that's 28 million children, to lack access to a park. And how we're trying to resolve this, how we're trying to fill this, we work in about 35 places. We have 35 field offices. We work in a lot of other communities as well. And we build parks, we work with community members to design parks. And that's probably also a lot of what your kind of the experiences that you're coming from, having looked at the attendance list. But there's a lot of other ways that we're trying to fill this park equity gap. We know that we can't build one park by one park. We need thousands and thousands of spaces. And that's just to fill the access gap, right? So we start thinking about places that are really welcoming, that are of high quality, that number grows exponentially. So we're trying to think about, what are the systems changes? What are the long-term solutions, the policies that can be in place to make sure that every time a park is built, it is engaging community, that it is serving local needs, that it's really expressing the local vision and local values that communities have. So the way that we try and advance all of that is through some of the activities that were just on the previous slide. And one of those is this peer learning network that we're all joining in today. And this is really a time for us to be able to dig in, to be able to share ideas together, to really talk about the barriers and the challenges. We really have found that this kind of a space is so important for us, having this community and being able to discuss what's working, what are the best practices, how do we adapt those for different places, and how do we discuss what's challenging so that we can all work together to provide that support and make sure that this work is happening around the country. So this is, as I was saying, this is one of the community practice tracks we're really, really, truly excited about. We know that engaging community, centering community is so important to having places that actually lead to those outcomes, to the health, the community, the equity, and the climate outcomes that parks can provide. So I'm going to hand the slides back over to our community strategies team, who are going to dig into some of the specifics about how parks and how this process and what are the policies and planning. What is the systems approach that we can take to making sure that parks really deliver on their promise for communities? So thank you again. Just really want to extend our welcome and our excitement for this session. I'm going to hand it back to our team. Thanks so much.
Great, thanks so much, Bianca. And before I hand it over to Carrie to talk more about our community strategies team and how we center community in all of the different bodies of our work at TPL, I just want to give a quick snapshot of the evolution of this communities of practice. So last year, we had representation from about 50 cities across the country, in which we were only able to have one session on how to center community in parks decision making. And it was really through surveys and testimonials and responses from those who attended our communities of practice last year that we realized the need to elevate specific topics for this year to come, and one of them being community engagement for lasting impact. So first and foremost, I just want to thank you for contributing all of your insights and questions to us this far to help formulate this track that we have for you all this upcoming year. And also, just as a friendly reminder, we do have these 2 other tracks that we are running where I believe about 30% of you are also registered to these, which is related to measuring and mapping park qualities, and as well as developer park partnership strategies. So with that, I will go ahead and stop my screen share. And Carrie, I hand it off to you.
Hey, Carrie, you're muted still.
Okay, can everybody see my slides?
Yes, I can see them.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Christina and Bianca, and welcome everyone. We're really excited that you're here, and I'm particularly excited to share a little bit about our community strategies work at Trust for Public Land. So here's our team. My name's Carrie Simmons. I direct our community strategies program. And then we also have 3 teammates, Geneva and Antonio, who are on the call today, as well as Daniela. And we're a team that really implements TPL's strategic commitment to community through a variety of different methods. Some of those include working with our local field staff across TPL's 30 offices. But then we also work to support community partners and practitioners like all of you with your questions and sort of existing programs around community engagement. We work with partners to evaluate really interesting and innovative community engagement practices that they're launching or running through city programs. And then we also are working with practice and research leaders to help make the case for community engagement in parks and public spaces. And the reason that our team supports the organization from a strategic commitment perspective is that we really believe that the community processes that lead up to the development or design of a park, that help to program and steward existing parks after they are developed, those community processes can be just as transformative as the public spaces themselves. And we really try through our sort of practitioner tools, our research products, and our practitioner networks to elevate the role of community workers, of community engagement in the overall vision and understanding of America's park and public space system. And in our sort of articulation of the sort of different segments of community engagement, we really try to connect the strategies and activities that practitioners are using to the outcomes that actually arise from those community processes. So we see these across 3 primary areas in our work. And the first one is really about community engagement strategies and activities that build relationships between people. So, Bianca mentioned that one of the things that Trust for Public Land is really focused on is closing the park equity gap at scale. And we find that a lot of times in our field offices, when we're developing a brand new public space in a community that's never had a park before, it becomes the kind of container for neighbors who maybe haven't built a relationship in their neighborhood and in the space where they live to actually get to know each other better and build social ties. And then there's a whole sort of tranche of community engagement activities, particularly when it comes to making design and programming decisions about a local park, that can really help sort of translate those sort of baseline community relationships to a shared understanding of identity and the development of a collective identity. So that means, if there had been, like a citizen advisory group that was working on sort of design feedback for a park, and maybe on day one, each of those participants from the community would really represent their own personal interests, amenities they might want to see in a park. Over time, we really see those kinds of groups morphing from representing individual interests to representing the community's interests, where maybe someone's sixth design meeting that they show up to, they're advocating for an amenity like a playground or a restroom in a park, to also the amenities that their neighbors care about. And that kind of shift that happens during the community process has direct ties to things like place attachment and then social bridging. And then we often observe through the park design and development process that once communities are galvanized around the development of a park, they open a park that they all worked on together, that many times that's actually just the beginning of the potential to use sort of that civic engagement muscle to apply towards other community scale challenges. So this relates to the sort of coalition building, network building activities that are common among park and public space community engagement projects, stewardship groups that may be attached to a specific sort of place-based initiative, but that would go on to work on another issue related to education or health or jobs and so forth. So Trust for Public Land operates a national survey every year to gather information about sort of the status of the 100 largest city park programs and community-based organizations that support parks in those places. And we just wanted to share a few highlights that arose from that survey this year, specific to community engagement. So in 27 of the cities that we surveyed, there were reports of community-based organizations and public agencies directly compensating community members for their role in community engagement, which was really exciting to see. And in 2/3 of the cities that responded to the survey, there were specific examples of community engagement activities that were leveraging public space relationships or participation toward issues like health, economic development, and food security through really creative partnerships with non-conservation or non-park groups. And then there were also, particularly related to the COVID pandemic, some shifts in innovation that people saw in their community engagement work related to technology, engaging community artists, and really focusing more on programming and park program initiatives. So as we're talking today, and as you hear about the case study that we're going to present, I want you to really think from a practitioner perspective about resources that would benefit the work that you do and ways that you might be able to partner with Trust for Public Land on one of these sort of community engagement practice areas that we're leading. So hopefully the discussion today generates some ideas, and that the community of practice that we're all kicking off today is just the beginning of some really interesting longer term partnerships. Just so you have a reminder sort of where we are today, we're right here November 10th on sort of an intro to what community engagement looks like from a research and practice perspective. And then we're going to focus in on some specific practice areas and questions that we hear commonly related to community engagement. So now I wanted to dig into a case study that was the first project that I ever worked on when I joined Trust for Public Land about 8 years ago, that I think really embodies a lot of these principles. And we're going to sort of share this story as a prompt for some questions. So if you have questions for me or for our team, you can go ahead and put those in the chat, and then we're going to have a facilitated discussion just after I'm finished. So I live in Washington State, about an hour east of Seattle, and 8 years ago started doing work in the Wenatchee Valley, which is pictured here. The Wenatchee Valley is about 2.5 hours east of Seattle. And this is the valley where the Cascade Mountains meet the Columbia River. And it's also the place in America where the majority of our country's apples and cherries are grown. So when you hear about Washington apples, or you go to your local grocery store and pick up an apple and look at the little sticker on it, the chances are that it was grown in this valley. The population of this community is about 50,000 people, and it's also one of the largest farm worker communities on the West Coast. And in Wenatchee, the majority of farm workers are Latino, people who have immigrated from Mexico, and primarily live in one single neighborhood called South Wenatchee that is really centered around the park space that you see here, Methow Park. And over the last few decades, this park is really underinvested and really empty most of the time. And the city engaged us to work with community leaders to try to develop a new vision for what Methow Park could look like. And when we got started, we immediately engaged 2 local community organizers, a pastor and an artist, to help us define and tailor our approach to connect with the community. And over the course of 6 to 12 months, we got started with some of the sort of conventional outreach methods that the city had really been using for other projects, like meeting and the local gym, putting flyers out on the city's Facebook page. And we didn't really get the community response or community participation that we expected. So these 2 gentlemen, Misael and Terry, started taking creative approaches to bringing the project to places where community members were. And once we tried that approach, the community engagement process really took off, and we started meeting people that really represented a diverse range of community interests and experience and perspectives. And when we did that, we actually heard that the renovation of Methow Park was very low on the priority list of community members. And that for us to be successful, this coalition of community members that were coming together to have conversations about the park, we actually needed to find a way for the park to relate to issues that were top of mind for community members in the farm worker and Latino communities and community members who live directly around the park. And through a series of surveys and community conversations, the things that you see up on the screen here were actually the issues that people wanted to address through this public space project, which is really complicated because a lot of these are very structural, sort of community level issues that aren't so easy to attach to a park development process. So to keep the community engaged, as we sort of got into the design process for Methow Park, we hosted lots of culture and arts-based engagement activities that really kept the community involved. As we learned more, made sure that we increased participation in community conversations and that we were reaching people where they were. So particularly because there are so many non-native English speakers in the community, we held all of our events in English and in Spanish, and we really emphasized opportunities for people to represent culture, preferences, histories that really allowed them to show their identity in the park even before it was renovated. A lot of this was possible through a really transformative investment from the National Endowment for the Arts into this project. So we're able to engage 3 artists who helped us run specific design activities for park amenities and for some of the community engagement processes. We also took these conversations outside of the park. So one of the sort of regular community engagement activities that we had every year was at the Northwest Mariachi Festival, which is hosted in Wenatchee, where more than 5,000 community members come for a multi-day event for music classes and lessons. And then at the end of the event, this sort of massive showcase of the most well-known mariachi musicians all over the country and all over the world. And going to places where community members were already gathering also helped us to promote the project to people who lived outside of the neighborhood of South Wenatchee, so that they would come visit and show up at events that we did hold in the park. And as we moved through the process about 2 or 3 years in, and we had a conceptual master plan that we were starting to use to raise funds, we also created opportunities for community members to sort of test out the design in place. So in this photograph, you'll see sort of a white circle painted in place where a new performance pavilion was going to go in, a kiosko, which is the #1 amenity that community members really wanted to see here. And when we started showing the design that was slated to be built, we heard really consistent feedback that this kiosko was too small and that it wouldn't be able to accommodate the cultural events that people wanted to see. We had used pretty standard industry tools to design it to have a capacity of a certain number of people for a 1-acre park. And we're confident that the kiosko was the right size until the community organized a folkloric dance event to actually dance on the circle with dances that would be common when the park was open. And it did turn out, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, that the traditional dances that people wanted to see in the space didn't actually match up with the industry standards that we were using to design the kiosko. So that just was one example of how the community actually was involved in making decisions that ended up in the built park. So I want to show you a few photos. I'm going to run through these quickly of the park as it exists today. This was all made possible through local, county, state, and federal grants, as well as a $2 million philanthropic campaign. And, this is a park that has a lot of amenities because it serves a lot of people. This is the densest neighborhood in Wenatchee and serves the greatest number of children of any park across any of the 25 city parks in that city system. But one of the things that I think is really important to focus on is actually the relationship building, representation of identity, and power building, community engagement categories that we talked at the top of the meeting. There really was a power shift that occurred in South Wenatchee, and particularly among the farm worker community during this project. And 12 community members that had been really involved formed a community coalition in the winter of 2018. So the photo you see here is the conceptual design plan that they were using for advocacy, and the 12 people who formed this original community group. And they called themselves the Parque Padrinos, which means godparents of the park. And Padrino in this sort of local culture, particularly for people who are coming from Mexico, is something that's applied to all sorts of community events and challenges, where if the community needs to really organize around a specific idea, people will sign up, donate money, and make a commitment to support whatever initiative it may be. It could be a quinceañera, it could be a disaster response if someone's house has burned down, it could be a wedding, another celebration, basically where a community member makes a commitment for long-term support. So in the case of Methow Park, community members would make a commitment to support both the renovation of Methow Park as well as its programming and stewardship once it opened. And when you sign up as a Padrino, you don't just sign up to sort of be on a list for the sort of membership of the organization. You have to sign up with a specific talent or a skill that you bring. So you see three different or two madrinas and one padrino who each signed up to be a sort of a specific leader for activities in the park. Someone who signed up to be the madrina of sewing, who had helped make some of those folkloric ballet costumes that you saw for kids who are learning ballet in the park. And the middle photo, someone from the community college who signed up to be the madrina of literacy and would run bilingual reading programs in the park. And then the padrino of mathematics, who would run math classes for free, particularly in the summer for children of farm workers who had come for the harvest. And, you know, as this group grew in 2018 with 12 people up to about 950 members as of this year, they really got involved in initiatives outside of the park. And in the 2018 midterm election, the Padrinos led a Get Out the Vote effort, and they knocked on more than 3,000 doors and made more than 4,000 phone calls. And they tripled the vote among Spanish speakers in their community, and actually elected some new leaders to their county commission and to city council that came from their community. So their efforts that they use to advocate for their local park, they're now applying to more sort of civic and structural issues that they had identified at the beginning of the process. And once they, you know, the Padrinos really saw the power of their voice and what they could accomplish, they also participated in statewide advocacy for a couple state ballot initiatives around immigrant and housing rights. And then the park opened in January of 2020. And then of course, the pandemic hit in March 2020. And the Parque Padrinos then really focused their efforts that they have been using to advocate for the park and its programming around vaccine education and outreach. And their local hospital funded them with a $200,000 grant because the hospital's marketing and sort of outreach messages really wasn't reaching the farm worker community. And for the first 6 months of the pandemic, the hospitalization and death rates for farm workers and Latino people in the Wenatchee Valley was twice as high as the white population. And within 6 months of the Parque Padrinos leading vaccine equity efforts, those rates reached parity. So it was really clear that they had built a muscle for organizing that really worked for the park, but also is really relevant for a lot of other community development issues. I think I've just got a couple more slides, but I wanted to stick on this slide for a second. This is one of the very first madrinas who signed up to volunteer in the park, Senora Beatriz. And we are launching a storytelling and arts initiative next week to highlight 10 of the very first Padrinos and Madrinas. And this is a quote from Senora Beatriz. So just in case there's anyone driving or not on screen, I will read it out loud so that you can hear it. It feels like the community that formed around the park renovation lifted me from the bottom of a well. In the past, I didn't go anywhere. I really felt like I was in a well. When I started going to the park, I communicated with more people. I'd tell new park visitors about what we were doing. I learned how to make piñatas at the park, and I got so good at it that then I started teaching the piñata making class. I have sold some of my piñatas in papel picado. So I think Senora Beatriz is really a good example of someone who met her neighbor, her next door neighbor, at the very start of this project, and then was one of the 3 leaders of the Vaccine Equity Initiative and had a full-time job that came out of this project, where she's really sort of using the relationships and the community engagement strategies that she learned in the park development process to impact other issues that she cares about for her family and the community. So I'm going to pass it over to Geneva now, who I think is going to facilitate some Q&A.
Yeah, hi, this is Geneva. I am going to be spotlit. Here we are. All right. Well, first off, round of applause for you, Carrie. It's always amazing to hear that story, and I'm sure there are many people clapping with me, but thank you for sharing that. And thank you everyone for joining us to hear this story, and hopefully beyond for many more stories to come. So we had a lot of great questions in the chat, and we also welcome you to continue asking some questions. I think we'll have about 10 minutes, so could get through at least 2 questions. But it seems like there's a really strong interest around this question of just like how did you start engaging the community? We were getting this question of like, what are specific strategies you had to go from not getting any turnout at these events to getting like a lot of community leadership to hold their own events?
I would say the thing that made the biggest difference, because I mean, we had half a dozen events that really flopped. You know, we would host these really conventional community engagement events, and then we got a small grant from a local foundation where we were able to pay Terry Valdez, the artist that I showed you, and Misael Perez, the minister, and then one youth leader. We paid each of them, I think, between $3,000 and $4,000 for sort of a year of on-call organizing and outreach support. And they really pushed back both on TPL and me and their sort of city parks department partners to think about engagement in a new way, and to go to some of these events like the Mariachi Festival, which at the beginning seemed not entirely relevant to the actual park design process. But then when we sort of followed Misael and Terry's lead and tried it out, it was really clear that the engagement we'd been missing really showed up at those events.
Thank you. And that was a question from Oana and Stephanie. So if I did not get that question right, please feel free to correct me in the chat. The other big interest is around budgeting. Unsurprisingly, it takes a lot of resources to do this kind of engagement. So there's an interest around just how do you plan to budget for a project that took so many turns, and also budgeting for authentically incorporating the feedback, like getting a larger kiosco in the park.
Yeah, it was a challenge, and even internally at TPL it was a challenge because this project took 7.5 years from engagement to construction and opening, which is longer than one of our typical projects. But we really made the case for that timeline because there had been a number of outside groups that had come to South Wenatchee to run a planning process that failed. And we really depended on local philanthropic support to give us the time and space in the first 2 or 3 years to make sure that the design of this park actually did represent community interest. And then I think once we were able to articulate through the design, the actual master plan of the park was a good sort of talking point for why this park would be different and should be different. And then, through the engagement with our organizers and then the Parque Padrinos, as that group started to formalize, we had many spokespeople who would show up to advocacy events, to meetings, and then even, as part of the $2 million philanthropic campaign, like when we were going to owners of the major fruit growing corporations, we would go with community members who would talk about why this was more of a park, more than just a park for them. So, I mean, in short, we really depended on private funding to cover those first 2 or 3 years. And then when we started applying for this federal grant from the NEA, our state local parks grant funding, and a federal grant from the Land and Water Conservation Fund, all of that community engagement and being able to really justify what we were asking for, why it was going to cost as much as it costs. It ranked this project both statewide and nationally, always in the top number one or number two ranked local park projects for any of the programs that we applied for. So there was a really high return on investment for those first 2 or 3 years of funding.
I've also just observed working with you, Carrie, that you always are optimistic and believe that there's money out there and you just have to appeal to the right people. So I would asterisk be optimistic. There's also some really great questions about compensating the community. I think that's a really difficult question to answer. But wondering if you have like a quick, like few suggestions for people working in parks agencies for doing community compensation.
Yeah, this is a challenge. You know, even internally at Trust for Public Land, our current policy around compensating community members is oftentimes a barrier if we meet an individual at an event. So actually at that very first Mariachi Festival, the person who was running a voter registration booth right next to Trust for Public Land's park design booth, this individual really wanted to get involved in the project and had lots of ideas. But we didn't have a very straightforward way to compensate her directly because she was just an individual. Both Terry and Miss Sayel were parts of organizations that we could grant to. So at the beginning, we really depended on a couple key organizations, Terry's art business and then Miss Sayel's church, to make subgrants out to community members. They had a lot more flexibility than Trust for Public Land did in the way that they compensated community members. But I was really encouraged by the City Park Fact survey that we heard back that there were 13 cities of the 100 largest park score cities that have figured out ways to do this and were actually able to compensate community engagement directly. So, you know, we just got that information in the last week or two. So before our next community of practice meeting, this is a question I really want to dig into in more detail and host a bigger conversation about methods and strategies that people are using to do that.
Nice plug. There's a really interesting question about like the fact that this took 7 years to go from engagement to opening, how you tracked change and interests from the community. Did you reflect those changes and interests in the design?
Yeah, that is a good question. Honestly, I think right from the beginning, it was clear when I would say a year into the park engagement process, it was clear that this was going to be a park design that should really exist to host events, like events and festivals and places where families gathered. That was really going to be sort of the tone and the nature of this park. And the other city parks in Wenatchee are very sort of pastoral, passive, you know, like riverfront, lots of benches, lots of grass, lots of running trails. And that really wasn't what community members wanted for Methow Park. So I would say in terms of the physical infrastructure of the park, it was clear pretty early that it was going to be a park for events to happen. And then I think what shifted during the engagement timeline was really the types of events that people were thinking about hosting. Where at the beginning, it was a lot of arts and cultural events. And then now there's a ton of sort of health programming, like dance and exercise classes that we funded and supported even before the park was renovated, just hiring like exercise instructors to be out there doing weekly events that now have turned into, you know, daily free programs that have really taken off.
Okay, there's a few more questions and they're all amazing. And we only have 1 minute left. So I will just recognize there's some that we can do like follow up on, like this RFQ question for community organizers. There's a very exciting question about evaluation that I'm sure you'll love, Carrie.
Okay.
And how are you seeing the community respond to this new space? I want to take like 1 minute for you to be able to answer that question because it's such a good one to end on. Thank you, Brian, for asking it.
Yeah, so I mean, this has really, I think, sparked curiosity and learning, both within the farm worker and Latino community, but also within city leadership. You know, city council members visit this project all the time and are inviting community members who are doing creative work in Met-Tau Park to advise them on other big sort of city municipal projects. So like there's a $90 million transportation grant that just came in to support a huge infrastructure project in Wenatchee. And the mayor, the director of the port, invited the Parque Padrinos to speak to the transportation cabinet secretary, Pete Buttigieg, who is in town to launch sort of the announcement of that investment. So I think the thing that I will always remember about this project is just that the impression that there isn't knowledge or expertise or pride in an underinvested place is something to really push back on. You know, it may take longer to find, you know, points of pride or people who are really bringing strength to an idea. They're out there. And it's a really long-term process to make sure that there are the appropriate platforms for people to sort of share and contribute what they have to contribute. And I'll go through the chat once I'm off the screen and make sure I respond to other questions we didn't get to. But thank you all for this engagement. We're really excited to have a lot more conversations like this over the next few months.
Great. Thank you both so much. I know we're quite eager to go into our breakout groups. Before we open them, I just want to share a friendly reminder that we will be in breakout groups for about 38 minutes, very specific, 38 minutes. And these are the TPL folks who will be in your room with you. So we are asking for folks to be on camera if that is possible. And for this to be more of an informal discussion, we're going to be asking folks to unmute and share your stories. But with that, I will ask Mali to open up the breakout groups and we will see you in the small rooms. Thank you.